There we go. We can see the battery connection. And next I'm going to use an app to connect over Bluetooth to the device where we can read the battery state and the values. So we can see them printing out. So remember, we have the USB-C power that's going to power the circuit and charge the battery. I have the battery charging IC configured for a maximum charging current of just under 400 milliamps, which we can see right here. Notice this is negative, right? So that means it's charging the battery. If it's positive, it means the battery's discharging. And we can see as we go down, it continues to charge at the same level because we're running off USB-C power. Now, let's see what happens when we disconnect the USB power. So I'm going to unplug the USB power, and I'm going to connect my Bluetooth app to it again so we can see what the values are. Let me another printout. We'll do one more. So now we can see the battery current is no longer negative. It's 140 amps, or excuse me, 140 milliamps, and that's what it takes to power the circuit and the ESP32. So we can see the battery is now discharging. Okay, now I'm going to turn over the solar panel. So now the solar panel is going to be exposed to the hot Grand Junction sun. We have the battery and the solar panel now. So let's connect once again and check out what we see. So now we have the battery state is charging, and notice the current, it's at about negative 250 milliamps. So that means the battery's charging if it's negative current. And we can see the voltage slowly climb here. So we have a battery voltage of just under 4, now it jumps to 4, so our battery is truly charging.